Okay, question for Greg from Ryan W. And Ryan is a tall person. He is 6'7", or approximately 2 meters for our friends that use the metric system. And Ryan's question is, his BMI has always put him on the high side of overweight at 250 pounds. And basically the root of his question is the BMI scale built for normal height people? Basically, is his height biasing his BMI and making it seem like he's more overweight than he should be based on BMI?
Yeah, so probably. Something you need to know about the BMI scale is it was developed in the 1830s by Lambert Adolphe Jacques Quetelet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, Adolphe Quetelet. That's how we're going to say his name on this show. So anyway, his name's not that important. The most important thing is it was developed in the 1830s. And when he was, looking... So it was developed based on dissected corpses. And based on the dissected corpses that he looked at, and just kind of some knowledge of how humans scale as they get bigger, he was like, height or weight certainly doesn't scale 1-to-1 with height. It seems to be somewhere between second order and third order. So, weight seems to scale with height squared or height cubed. Realistically, probably somewhere in between. If I had to pick an ideal number, it probably scales with height raised to the 2.5th power. But it seems to be maybe a little bit closer to 2 than 3. So for BMI, it's just going to be, body mass in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. But even when it was developed, he was like, 2.5 would probably be a little better. But like I said, the important thing, it was developed in the 1830s. Not everyone had TI-89 graphing calculators back then, and certainly didn't have a calculator on their phone in their pocket at the time. And so it was really easy to raise stuff to the second power, really easy to raise stuff to the third power. A non-negligible computational challenge to raise something to the 2.5th power. So BMI was developed as, mass divided by height to the second power, and that's what it is. But even when it was developed, it was known it's probably not perfect. So the reason why this is relevant is the impact of scaling height to the wrong, with the wrong exponent, isn't going to matter all that much for people who are normal height, which is, kind of for whom the formula was developed. But it's going to matter more and more for people who are either way, way considerably shorter than average or way, way considerably taller than average. So to use the example of Ryan W., who asked this question, he's approximately 2 meters tall and approximately 115 kilograms. So if we plug that into the current BMI formula, 115 divided by 2 squared, he comes out with a BMI of almost 29, 28.75. However, if we use what was, at the time believed to be a more appropriate exponent, in which I believe current, like ongoing science has found is probably a better exponent of 2.5, like height raised to the power of 2.5 rather than 2. His BMI then would be 20.3, which is normal. And so I think that...
You say 20.3?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, for someone 2 meters tall, that's a big difference. So yeah, and I mean, if you've ever seen someone who's 6'7" or 2 meters tall, who weighs 250 pounds or about 115 kilos, like that, to my eye, is a healthy weight on that frame. So anyway, yeah. So at 6'7", 250, you're probably a perfectly healthy weight. And BMI is probably telling you are heftier than it likely should be telling you, based on the fact that BMI was developed at a time when computational power was severely limited. So they just developed a formula that worked well for people who are around average height. It probably cuts the other way for people who are considerably shorter than average. So one thing which I guess is important is that like kind of normal body height is able to skew high much easier than it is able to skew short, unless someone has dwarfism of some sort. But, you know, kind of normal height for people goes all the way down to, you know, maybe 5'3" for a woman on the shorter side of things, but not an outlier by any stretch of the imagination, up to about 6'2"-ish, 6'3" for men. So you can skew higher than that pretty easily. Like there's a lot of people without developmental conditions who are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", all the way up to 7 foot who don't maybe have gigantism. There aren't that many people who are like 4'5" without some form of dwarfism. So it's probably not as extreme for really short people as it is for really, really tall people. But it probably does cut the other way as well, where there's, you know, some people who are 4'11", 5 feet tall, that BMI says are normal weight who are maybe overweight. But yeah, so it's just purely a matter of the exponent not being perfect for the BMI formula. Works reasonably well for most people. Probably doesn't work great for super jacked people overall in general, but in terms of even general population, works much more poorly for people who are very, very tall and likely very, very short as well.
I've got a slightly related, I wouldn't say rant, but I would say tangent. It is kind of wild when you think of the number of things that we still use, and the reason we use them is because of computational limitations that no longer exist.
For sure.
But we haven't updated it, you know? So like BMI, we could do better, but we don't. Why does everybody use a p-value of 0.05? Well, because at a certain point, they had to print tables of either 0.01, 0.05, or whatever, you know? That's why we had specified cutoffs and didn't just say, well, just report your p-value as a continuous number. Well, we can very easily report exact p-values now, extremely easily, but we still treat it as a very, very, very rigid cutoff, you know? There was one other I had in mind. Oh, yeah, we talked about Bayesian statistics a couple episodes ago. Got a lot of surprisingly positive feedback on that. I think people are trolling us. But, you know, like when you lay it out in terms of the general concept of what each approach is doing, Bayesian brings a lot to the table. But frequentist methods became like the way to do it because the computation was a lot more straightforward before our computational capacities caught up. But still, it's like once something is ingrained based on prior computational difficulties, it's very hard to get that inertia to budge.
Yeah, I mean, as long as something works well enough under most contexts, there's going to be a lot of inertia. So, I mean, if for some reason the human population had another explosion in height as the one that occurred during the like early and middle part of the 20th century, and you know the average human height became 6'5", guarantee you we would get an update to the BMI formula pretty quickly. But for the time being, you know, it doesn't work great for a non-negligible amount of people, but it works, you know, pretty well for 90-95% of people. So there's just not that much energy pushing for it to change. Similar with frequentist statistics, like they have issues, but like they seem to generally work well enough most of the time for most applications. So yeah, people just roll with them. But yeah, and I mean, of those examples, dog, like BMI is way more egregious than frequentist versus Bayesian statistics because, you know, you still kind of need to understand Bayesian statistics, and like it's not something that's like super straightforward, but like, you know, literally the only difference between the current BMI formula and what would probably be a better BMI formula is like, when you type in divided by height squared, just add 0.5 to the end of it. And, you know, that's going to take a quarter of a second on literally every calculator in the world. But yeah, people just don't do it.
Do you think if we started over, if we started fresh today and said, how are we going to do this data analysis thing? Do you still think we would lean toward frequentist over Bayesian if you ignored the past history of using it so much?
That's a good question. I think we'd probably go Bayesian.
I think we would too.
Just because, like, a Bayes factor is so much more explicitly interpretable than a p-value is.
Yeah.
I think it would be just more, like, inherently appealing and understandable to people just learning about statistics.
I agree.